Why someone gives up on your novel halfway through. How can we stop this from happening? How can we get someone to read your novel from start to finish and love it throughout the whole thing and not put it down halfway through? We're going to be addressing those questions and more, and we're starting right now. There are some novels you have read that you couldn't just help but keep on reading chapter after chapter, even late into the night. You started it and you finished it in record time. You couldn't help it. You just felt compelled to keep turning page after page. You had to know how it was going to end, what was going to happen. And yes, there are some novels that you have started where you have read a few pages, maybe gotten a couple chapters in, but then stopped. You put a bookmark into the book, put it down, with the intentions of coming back, but you never do. Why is that? What happened? What made you read one novel where you couldn't help but turn the page and finish reading it? But then there's another book that you read and you just put it down and you never do come back to it. Chances are there is no feeling, no emotional impact on you to keep reading. There is no conflict in interest. You did not feel as though the character was on a journey. You felt as though the story was standing still. The character, the protagonist, was not challenged. They were not searching for anything. They did not have any conflicts along the way. Whenever a story has no feeling of movement, as though the character is searching for something, you feel as though the story is standing still. And this hurts the story because it's like reading a newspaper. There's no feeling or sense of movement, as though a character has to achieve something, looking for something. You sense that the character is in conversations with other people, but it doesn't mean anything. They're not searching for anything. You feel as though there is no antagonist, nothing to fear. There is nothing out there that can hurt your protagonist or challenge your protagonist. A great story is sold by its villain. The villain can be yourself, it can be weather, it can be another person, it could be an alien. It doesn't matter what the antagonist is, but the reader has to sense that there is some type of villain, an antagonist, something that is stopping your protagonist from living a happy life. That protagonist is a threat to your protagonist. And when you sense there is no threat, then you don't fear or wonder for the protagonist. You don't have any desire to turn the page because you feel as though the protagonist is safe. And when writing a story, you never want your protagonist to feel safe. This creates for a boring story. And a boring story is what you stop reading. The more you fear the antagonist, the more you wonder about them, the more you're going to fear for your protagonist, causing you to turn the page. Even in the movie Jaws, we worried about the shark. Even though when it wasn't attacking anyone, it was still in the back of our minds. We feared Darth Vader in Star Wars. Even when he wasn't on screen, we couldn't help but think about him. When we fear for the protagonist, then we are compelled to turn the page. We have created suspense. Suspense doesn't always have to be in a thriller novel. It can be in a drama, or a romance, or a comedy. Suspense is simply about wanting to know what's going to happen next. You wonder if the protagonist is going to be safe. How is the protagonist going to solve this problem? Can they walk away? Why can't they walk away? What happens if they do? Can the protagonist overcome this mean, big antagonist? Even in terms of endearment, which is a drama about a family, the antagonist was the overbearing mother, and the protagonist, being the daughter, all she wanted was unconditional love, but the mother wouldn't give it. So you don't have to write about aliens or terrorists wanting to blow up something. You can create an antagonist out of anything. But the antagonist is what really drives a story, making us wonder and fear for the protagonist. And when we know what the what both of them want? By knowing what the protagonist wants and the antagonist, and how both of them have to meet up with each other at some point. One has to win, one has to lose. This is what makes us want to turn the page. We know that the two of them are going to meet up with each other at some point. The question is, who's going to win? And when we fear for the protagonist because we fear the antagonist, then we feel the need to keep turning the page because we want to see these two meet up with each other. We want to sense a feeling of inner and outer conflict within the protagonist. We want to know what they're thinking and feeling. The more you put the more you put the reader into the mind of the protagonist, the more they're going to want to read on because they can understand what the protagonist is thinking and feeling. It's as if we're seeing through their eyes. But when you read a story where you're not inside the mind of the protagonist, then it's like reading a newspaper. The information is there, but you don't connect. But if you allow the reader to become at one with the protagonist, we can understand their motives, we can understand their actions. You may not agree with them, but at least you understand them. You understand what they want, what their objective is. It's like James Bond. A James Bond novel is very straightforward. We know what the villain wants. The villain wants to take over the world. James Bond has an objective to stop him. By understanding both the protagonist and antagonist's goal, that makes us want to read on, because we know that the two of them have to square off at some point, and only one can win, and the antagonist is stronger than the protagonist, making us fear for the protagonist while we fear the antagonist. That mix is going to make us want to turn the page, because it's not the protagonist who is facing the bad guy, it's ourselves. Because when you read a novel, you can't help but put yourself into that novel. You now become the protagonist. So when the big bad antagonist is after the protagonist, it's really after you. This happens a lot in a Stephen King novel. We can't help but put ourselves into the character. So when the big bad villain comes after the protagonist, it's coming after you. Stephen King has this way of making you feel and think and understand and see through the eyes of the protagonist, as though the story is really happening to you. Think of the movie Titanic. Everyone who watched that movie knew that the boat was going to sink. That wasn't a surprise to anyone. That is the very basis of the movie. The question is, who's going to survive? Because we know there aren't enough lifeboats for everybody. The majority of people on board are not going to survive. So we watch the movie wondering who is and who won't survive. The idea of it hitting the iceberg is not a surprise. Imagine if you watched the movie Titanic, in which it was completely made up. And it's about a boat sailing across the ocean with people talking. There would be no feeling of suspense, because we would think it's just people on a boat. But because we know ahead of time, when the movie starts, that the boat is going to sink, creates the suspense. It lingers in the background. So when the characters are talking to one another, we're always knowing that the boat is going to sink and not everybody is going to survive. So it creates a feeling of suspense that makes us want to keep watching. A great story feels like an arrow going forward. You feel as though it's a car going faster, but going in a straight line. You don't want your story to feel like it's wandering, where the protagonist has no goal, no objective, where the antagonist doesn't even exist, or if it does exist, we don't know what they want. You don't have to necessarily tell the reader what the antagonist's goal is right at the very beginning. You can hint at it and build on it as the story goes. But you don't have to give it away all in full detail right at once. Just as long as the reader can sense that there is an antagonist, they do have some type of goal, and it's not a good one, and the antagonist is bigger and stronger than the protagonist. This all of a sudden creates a feeling of suspense. We worry for the protagonist, and now we want to read on. We have this feeling as though the story has a straight line. It's not a story wandering with just people standing around talking. Chances are, if you're reading a book and you want to stop reading, it's because you don't feel as though the story is going anywhere. You feel as though the story is just people standing around talking. There's no objective, no bad guy, no good guy, no wants and needs, no obstacles. It's just random talking, which creates this feeling as though the story is standing still. If you want to create a successful story, always give a feeling as though there is movement. Let the reader know who the bad guy is, what they want, and make sure that they're bigger and stronger than the protagonist. Give us an idea of who the protagonist is and what do they want. And this creates a feeling of forward movement and suspense that's going to make someone want to turn the page. It doesn't have to be action. It can be a drama, a comedy, a horror novel. They all have a feeling of suspense. And that suspense is what's going to drive the novel forward and make people want to turn the page. Always make sure that your story feels like an airplane going down a runway, getting faster as it goes. The reader can sense it. Even if it's a drama or a comedy, the reader should sense that this is a story going down a straight line, just like an airplane would going down a runway. A straight line, getting faster, and you can sense that this is going somewhere. When you're on an airplane, you can tell that it's going to lift. It's going somewhere. It's not going a straight line to stop. It's something big is going to happen. And that is what your story needs to feel like. That something big is going to happen at some point. The good guy and the bad guy are going to meet each other, and it's only one of them can walk away. And the bad guy is bigger and stronger than the good guy. This creates a feeling of suspense, a feeling of the story going forward. It's going to make someone want to turn the page until the end and not give up on the novel. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my website. I'll leave a link in the description down below, where you can visit my site and get a tremendous amount of information from all the blogs that I have that will help you become the greatest writer you can be. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my next video that I have on the big no-no with MacGuffins in your novel and how they can hurt your novel or make them great. In fact, I'm going to leave a link for that video right here, and you can click on it right now and start watching it and start learning.